today we will be talking about the principles of language acquisition, and which should be considered as we prepare materials, as we develop materials for language teaching. So still, this is under our subject language learning materials development. Principle number one. A prerequisite for language acquisition is that the learners are exposed to a rich, meaningful, and comprehensible input of language in use. We should remember that there should be rich, meaningful, and comprehensible. You provide the students with a lot of materials. In order to acquire the ability to use the language effectively, the learners need a lot of experience. You should remember that there should be a lot of experience in terms of using the language being used in a variety of different ways, variety of different ways for a variety of purposes, different purposes. They need to be able to understand enough of this input to gain positive access to it, and it needs to be meaningful to them. It should also be meaningful to the students. That's according to Krashen in 1985. They also need to experience particular language items and features many times in meaningful and comprehensible input in order to eventually acquire them. So if there's this limited use, limited encounter or experience to the language, it could be possible. It's not that possible that language would be developed, that they would be able to develop language. Each encounter helps to elaborate and deepen awareness and to facilitate the development of hypotheses needed for eventual acquisition. So they would not be able to acquire the language if they are not exposed to meaningful, rich, and comprehensible input of the language. Because when they are exposed, that's the time that they will be able to develop their hypothesis, their learnings. Now, how do we apply it in materials development? One, make sure the texts and tasks are as interesting. The tasks are interesting, the texts are interesting, relevant, and enjoyable as possible, so as to exert a positive influence on the learner's attitudes to the language and to the process of learning it. So that's one thing that we should remember. Text should be interesting, relevant, and enjoyable for our learners. And number two, set achievable challenges which help to raise the learner's self-esteem when success is accomplished. So the challenges, the activities, the tasks that you provide them should also be achievable to the learner, so that they would be able to develop their self-esteem, their confidence in making use of the language. And number three, stimulate emotive responses through the use of music, song, literature, art, etc. So you can make use of those materials like music, like you can incorporate songs, you can make use of literary materials, you can incorporate art in developing their language skills through making use of controversial and provocative texts. You can also make use of controversial and provocative texts through personalization and through inviting learners to articulate their feelings about a text before asking them to analyze it. Now, here is an example of material. Tomlinson offers the students choices of texts and of tasks. So, like what Tomlinson did, you can offer a variety of texts, a variety of tasks to the students, and he consults the students about the topics they would like to read about and discuss. This is what they did on a national materials development project in Namibia. So that's what they did in Namibia, and we then respected the students' requests for texts and such provocative topics as drug abuse, teenage pregnancy, and marital abuse. So it's up to you as teacher. You can provide them with provocative materials, and then the students would be the ones to choose what they want to discuss. One, make sure that the materials contain a lot of spoken and written texts. A lot of spoken and written texts, which provide extensive experience of language being used in order to achieve outcomes in a variety of text types and genres in relation to topics, themes, events, locations, etc., likely to be meaningful to the target learners. Provide them with a lot of spoken and written text wherein they would be able to experience and uh, they will be able to expose themselves. Number two, another consideration, make sure that the language the learners are exposed to is authentic in the sense that it represents how the language is typically used, how the language is being used in the real life situations. That's what you should provide the students. If the language is inauthentic because it has been written or reduced to exemplify a particular language feature, then the learners will not acquire the ability to use the language typically or effectively. Much has been written on the issue of authenticity, and some experts consider that it is useful to focus attention on a feature of a language by removing distracting difficulties and complexities from sample text. You remove the difficulties, the complexities. Tomlinson posited that such contrived focus might be of some value as an additional aid to help the learner to focus on salient features, but the prior and subsequent exposure to those features in authentic use is essential. One thing that we should remember, authentic authentic use of the language, and we try to remove complexities for our students. Number three, make sure that the language input is contextualized. Language use is determined and interpreted in relation to its context of use, how they make use of the language. Decontextualized examples do not contain enough information about the user, the addressee, the relationship. So meaning it's relevant. It's relevant to your students' lives. I can, for example, think of at least three different interpretations of give him the keys, let him drive it, but uh, I do not know what it really means. So that's one thing that we should remember. Okay, contextualize. Examples of materials. Tomlinson also cited that teachers may use what he called task-free activities to help them to apply principle of language acquisition 1. This involves me at the beginning of every lesson reading a poem or a story. You can also do it like how they did it. Okay, reading poem or story or telling a joke or anecdote. There are no questions or tasks after the listening. Just written copies of the text for those students who were engaged by it to take home, read, and file away. The students are encouraged to ask me questions, and you can ask them to. You can also do it. Okay, students would be tasked to ask questions about the text at any time and to return to read the text they have collected many times. Tomlinson also mentioned that he also used extensive reading, extensive listening, and extensive viewing to help to apply this principle. And I use a text-driven approach to developing units of materials in which an extensive text drives the skills and language activities of each unit. So extensive, so as to provide rich materials to the learners. Now, let's move on to principle of language acquisition 3. It states that language learners who achieve positive affect are much more likely to achieve communicative competence than those who do not. So the positive affect. Language learners need to be positive about the target language. So they should be motivated about learning the language. There should be positivity in them about their learning environment, about their teachers. They want their teachers. They're not afraid of their teacher. So that's the only time that they will be able to develop language about their fellow learners and about their learning materials. They're not afraid of the text that they would be reading. There's no fear inside the class. They're happy. There's a motivating environment. They also need to achieve positive self-esteem and to feel that they are achieving something worthwhile. So you should be able to make them feel that, oh, you're learning, you're doing good. Above all, they need to be emotionally involved in the learning process and to respond by laughing, getting, and you should make them laugh. You should, as teachers, make them mad at times about what they are listening to, about what they are reading, feeling sympathy, feeling happy, feeling sad. Those expressions. From those expressions, you would know that they are learning, that they are engaged. Positive emotions seem to be the most useful in relation to language acquisition, but it is much better to feel angry than to feel nothing at all. Now, how do we apply it in principles of materials development? Number one, make sure that texts and tasks are as interesting, relevant, and enjoyable as possible so as to exert positive influence on learners' attitudes and language on the process of learning it. Okay, so I think those are mentioned a while ago. Okay, set achievable challenges. We also mentioned that a while ago. Stimulate emotive responses to the use of mu. Parang parehas. Stop.